So what's on your mind? And I would encourage that we just take a minute and think about your question and think about, how am I trying to say this? The benefit to others of your question before you ask it. Just how can this benefit others? And that can help us sometimes word it or sometimes reshape it in our own minds. No need to be perfect. Since we can't accomplish that anyway. Forget it. Yeah.
I sometimes get into a situation where I'm always thinking about these scientific questions, and I know that if I were at a certain level of practice, I wouldn't have so many of these questions. But you think of compassion and loving kindness and the four immeasurables being associated with a spiritual practice that being in the human realm can unravel. In other words, if we're born a human, then we can get a grasp of the four immeasurables. Whereas if you're an animal, you don't do that. You might have compassion as an animal, but you can't really be aware of it. And so I guess my question is, I have quite a few when it comes to science, but if for some reason there are no longer any humans, then, on this plane that I'm seeing right here on this planet, I sort of wonder, well, then what happens to this whole rebirth thing? Because there's been some practice, and there's going to be some evolvement. But I'm just wondering what that would look like, and for Eric too. So I better shut up.
So I'm going to try and capture your question for the people streaming. So you think about various, what you're calling scientific things, and one of them is if there were no humans on the earth, what is the question? What would happen to what?
Where would we go? Let's say
where would we go? Well, I don't know, and I don't think anyone in this room knows. And but your question points out something quite important that comes out of the sutras. The sutras being what the Buddha spoke. So Tibetan practitioners often don't study sutras. What we study are commentaries on them, and that's good. That's good. But then we don't kind of know what the Buddha said. So the Buddha said about these kind of questions that he didn't entertain them. He did not try to answer them, and he would say to the person, "What's the usefulness to you in your practice of that question?" And he made, I'm not saying yours isn't, right? I'm just I'm just, because I think there might be still a question inside the question, we can get at it. But he said it's like if someone shoots you with an arrow, do you contemplate, this wood is made of molecules, and where did this come from? And there's these feathers. Are these duck feathers, or are these pheasant feathers? Or no, you try to pull the arrow out. So what is he saying there? He's saying back to the four truths of the Noble One. We suffer. What's the cause of it? There's an end to suffering, and there's a path. So he says, focus there, focus there. And but there is an interesting piece in there that. Well, let me stop there and see. You still have something in there about rebirth, which I think is.
It ties in, I guess, with an earlier question I had of all of the animal species that were developing, like the dinosaurs, and then even earlier the trilobites, and working its
like
way
evolution.
on fish, and yes, and
extinction, evolution and extinction.
Yeah. And then humans came. You had the apes and the branching off into humans, and I'm just wondering at what point. And then there were whole different species of animals which accompanied the humans, and animals that got along with humans, which I don't think the dinosaurs would have too much. I don't think you could farm with dinosaurs too well. So I'm just,
I think let me see if I can get at it. Is it like, okay, if let's just say the whole Earth disappears, because it could. It's just floating, according to our scientific understanding now. We have to understand our scientific understanding changes all the time as it maybe gets more precise. But there's been many theories, I mean, we didn't used to have the theory of relativity. We thought the Earth was flat and the sun was in the middle, and the Earth was in the middle, and scientists were sent to prison for saying that the sun was in the center. So, shift. Science is not impeccable either. But there are some teachings, this is the little bit I know about it, that the Dharma's never lost, and our efforts toward the Dharma are never lost. Our consciousnesses are beginningless and endless. Okay, you know that as a basic teaching. Not whether you accept it, but do you know it's a basic teaching that consciousness is endless and beginningless? You can't find when it would have started. You can't find when it would end. So consciousness and form are very connected, but they have their own continuums. So when you drop that form, when we drop this form, consciousness continues. It doesn't go out. At least this is the teaching, okay? Whether you agree or not, that's up for each of us to investigate, for each of us to decide on our own. There's nothing about, like you gotta buy this doctrine or else. But it is the teaching. So along with that, what I have heard from reliable teachers, there are times when the Dharma doesn't really take form in the worlds. It is kind of held in an immaterial way, just within consciousness. Mm-hmm. So it may not, just as the earth may not always be here, much less humans, but that consciousness, that wisdom, compassion, it is there, but it's not spatial, so it's not there. Consciousness is immaterial. When you see that, just think of a thought. Is a thought material or immaterial? So, thus consciousness. So, Yeah, that's as close as I can get. And so they say that there have been times through beginningless time when not only was the Earth not here, well, even scientists say that. Pre-Big Bang, was the Earth here? No. So, different times, many different forms. Okay? And during that time, the Dharma, the consciousness of wisdom and compassion, isn't in a form. You know, it doesn't need to be. Full Buddha nature is also not a form. It's pure wisdom. Can you get your hand on wisdom? Is it have a color, a shape, a size? Pure compassion, does that have color, shape, size, space? No. So, very puzzling, but
So consciousness is not human-centric, but it's human-discoverable?
yeah. We've got everything we need to develop it. You already have it. You have it. You have all kinds of consciousnesses. You have awareness, clarity. We also have confused consciousness, where our actions from the past have these habit forms. They're not forms, but habits that take form through us. They say it's quite good to be in the human realm. It's the easiest one to develop the consciousness from. And as you pointed out, animals can certainly seem like they're acting with compassion or even seem like they're acting with anger and such. I don't think they are. You say, that's a really angry dog. We have no idea what that dog is. We can see they're barking, they're biting or whatever, but we don't know what is even going on. We're not in that consciousness. So we anthropomorphize. We anthropomorphize our animals, and we say, they're thinking this, and they're doing that, and she likes this, and she likes that. We haven't got a clue, except, you put the food out and they eat. I mean, are they like, they climb on your lap, and certainly they have a consciousness too. It's just that we don't know. So yeah, there would be times. And what my teachers, two of them who talked about this at various times, said, so what do you take out of this for your practice so you don't just become someone shot with an arrow who tries to examine the arrow and dies, but pulls the arrow out or gets help? What you take is, wow, it's the jump to precious human life. Right now, I'm a human. Right now, I've got the Dharma. This is so rare. I don't know how rare, but it's rare. So use it. Practice on the cushion, off the cushion. Otherwise, these things aren't very helpful. They can become just distractions. And so whenever we can use them to guide ourselves to practice, then useful. They can be fun. It's fine to do fun, but just watching, now I used to watch movies a lot. Now I'm watching science things a lot, You know what I'm saying? And just feeling like I'm very smart. I'm very clever. I'm talking about myself. And, but not really helping anybody. I know a lot of information, and I can tell it to you. But is it helpful? Is it bringing more kindness in the world? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a good one. Yeah, Peter.
Speaking of compassion, they were talking on the news last night about extra efforts they're trying to make in Seattle to deal with the heroin epidemic. And there's a part of me that says these people are killing themselves with heroin overdoses. That's their business. And it seems to me that efforts to get them off and into a more productive life are fine, but somehow or other it seems to me it would be better if we could figure out how they got there in the first place and did prevention, but I'm sure that the Dharma would say, even though I think they're doing it themselves, I should have more compassion for the people that are killing themselves with their drug overdoses.
Huh. That's interesting. Well, you might know this phrase, idiot compassion. Do you know? It's kind of a harsh phrase, but I use it on myself at times. And I'm not saying the folks in Seattle, I don't know what they're doing to help heroin addicts, but a lot of my own efforts, say, in the past have been idiot compassion, like just go in there and do something because this is so bad. And then you go in and you do something and you go away, or later you hear, wow, what you did made it worse, or didn't help at all, or wasted a lot of resources, or only considered this tiny group and didn't see the effects on this group and this group, because so the solution was kind of idiot compassion. So I think, the Dharma doesn't say just go do something or just feel anything, but we want to become more aware, right? I mean, of everything that we can, even our own discouragement or overwhelm or whatever, when we look at the vast suffering. We want to be aware of our response to that, our reactions. And I think in America we have a lot of compassion that's misguided, I can think of a really good example, and probably I feel like that, I think that's what you're pointing at with this, like maybe some of their plans are not going to be so helpful. And yes, it always makes sense to look at what are the causes and conditions here, as vast as we can, and then get all those affected at the table to help with the solution. We've kind of lost track of that. That's a good way to function in relative reality. Find out why is this happening. Talk to the ones who are involved, both the addicts, the caretakers, their families, the schools, and have a lot more wisdom in the proposed solution. And then that's, compassion tied with some kind of relative wisdom. The ultimate wisdom understands, and I can only kind of parrot this like I wish I knew it, but understands that there's some kind of immense impermanence happening there, lots of karmic things going on, and each being in that situation has their own karma to work out, and including the caretakers, the addicts, you, me, all of us, and that it's all empty of any solid, separate, inherent existence. We see it as solid, separate situation, not changing. That's not what's going on. Mm-hmm. But still, we want to act in a relative way with loving kindness. We want to act with compassion. We want to act with equanimity to everybody. So that's our work. Does that help?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to relate to the epidemic and the fact that the greedy folks are adding something to the heroin that makes it much more deadly.
Oh,
but if I were dealing with an individual who was an addict, I think my ability to have compassion and so forth would be much different.
Yeah, and that that is compassion already. And if it was, let's say, your son who was caught up in the greed and putting the deadly substance in, you would also have compassion for that being. Because you'd be like, oh my God, what's my son doing? So this is why when we're trying to develop compassion, we go to this, it's a stance that we take. And you don't have to, it's not a belief, but that we are, each one of us, completely close with those beings. The ones doing the harm, the ones being harmed. They have helped us in the past. If I take that stance, I don't know if they really did in a past life, but if I take that stance, my response is more effective. I come from a place of love, not judgment, not these are the victims, these are the bad guys. That's always going to continue the stress. But if I come, all suffering beings, the killers, the killed, all suffering beings, then my heart opens. It maybe doesn't even matter what I do, like if I give money to that cause, or I write a letter, or I write and tell them, gee, I think it'd be better if you did this. But my way of coming toward them is in line with reality. So it's apt to be more effective. I want to hear from Eric on this, and I want to share one thing. Last night I watched a documentary on the civil rights movement in the 60s, 70s. It was so powerful. And I kept watching a number of the African American leaders in particular who seemed to be acting out of this loving place, including Martin Luther King, which is, he borrowed it from Gandhi, but I mean, he had that spirit in him. Harry Belafonte was kind of the focus of the movie, Julian Bond. Just so many of these beings who, in the face of just ferocious wishes by people to kill them, just held on to, you want to kill me, but I love you. It's just mind-boggling, but you realize the effects of that stance they took. They did many strategies. Some were successful, some not. But the stance was, I'm not going along with the hate. I'm not doing it us and them. And so even in a situation where we see someone doing harm, there's a lovely line that says, may I stop all beings from doing harm without harming them. That's such a bodhisattva wish. But that'd be cool, wouldn't it? So may we be able to do that. Stop all beings from committing harm without harming them. That's what the nonviolent thing was about. Eric, would you share? I saw you bringing something up.
Yeah, I have some.
Good. Thank you.
I have a number of patients who are heroin addicts or addicted, more commonly addicted to prescription drugs. And in some cases, I'm the one that's giving it to them. And of course, I don't know who's addicted to their pain medication and who's not. Much of the time, I'm not infallible, and people can easily fool me if they want to, because my basic approach is to take what people tell me at face value. But I think, the reason I was saying that is it drives the people who support me in my clinic crazy, because when you uncover an addiction or you start to address it, the person becomes, they try all kinds of different strategies to get the thing that they're addicted to, and often they're really abusive and angry and manipulative and lie and and I think it's hard not to take it personally. But I think one perspective is there's not a heroin addiction epidemic. The epidemic is of despair and isolation. And heroin addiction is one way of coping with that. And so what I've taken to doing with the doctors in training and actually the staff in my clinic is I play them a little viral video, which I'll play for you too. I don't think you have to be able to see it for it to work. It's a summary of a book, the thesis of a book called Chasing the Scream, which is a book about the war on drugs and written by an addict. And I find it helpful. It's about 5 minutes. Is it okay if I
Yeah,
play it?
I think
it's
so.
about 5.5 minutes.
Just
So-
make sure people can.
Yeah, I'll play it.
What causes, say, heroin addiction? This is a really stupid question, right? It's obvious. We all know it. Heroin causes heroin addiction. Here's how it works. If you use heroin for 20 days, by day 21, your body would physically crave the drug ferociously because there are chemical hooks in the drug. That's what addiction means. But there's a catch. Almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. If you, for example, break your hip, you'll be taken to a hospital and you'll be given loads of diamorphine for weeks or even months. Diamorphine is heroin. It's in fact much stronger heroin than any addict can get on the street because it's not contaminated by all the stuff drug dealers dilute it with. There are people near you being given loads of deluxe heroin in hospitals right now. So at least some of them should become addicts. But this has been closely studied. It doesn't happen. Your grandmother wasn't turned into a junkie by her hip replacement. Why is that? Our current theory of addiction comes in part from a series of experiments that were carried out earlier in the 20th century. The experiment is simple. You take a rat and put it in a cage with 2 water bottles. One is just water, the other is water laced with heroin or cocaine. Almost every time you run this experiment, the rat will become obsessed with the drugged water and keep coming back for more and more until it kills itself. But in the 1970s, Bruce Alexander, a professor of psychology, noticed something odd about this experiment. The rat is put in the cage all alone. It has nothing to do but take the drugs. What would happen, he wondered, if we tried this differently? So he built Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats. It's a lush cage where the rats would have coloured balls, tunnels to scamper down, plenty of friends to play with, and they could have loads of sex. Everything a rat about town could want. And they would have the drugged water and the normal water bottles. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, rats hardly ever use the drugged water. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. But maybe this is a quirk of rats, right? Well, helpfully, there was a human experiment along the same lines. The Vietnam War. 20% of American troops in Vietnam were using a lot of heroin. People back home were really panicked because they thought there would be hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war was over. But a study followed the soldiers home and found something striking. They didn't go to rehab. They didn't even go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped after they got home. If you believe the old theory of addiction, that makes no sense. But if you believe Professor Alexander's theory, it makes perfect sense. Because if you're put into a horrific jungle in a foreign country where you don't want to be, and you could be forced to kill or die at any moment, doing heroin is a great way to spend your time. But if you go back to your nice home with your friends and your family, it's the equivalent of being taken out of that first cage and put into a human rat park. It's not the chemicals, it's your cage. We need to think about addiction differently. Human beings have an innate need to bond and connect. When we are happy and healthy, we will bond with the people around us. But when we can't, because we're traumatized, isolated, or beaten down by life, we will bond with something that gives us some sense of relief. It might be endlessly checking a smartphone, it might be pornography, video games, Reddit, gambling, or it might be cocaine. But we will bond with worth something, because that is our human nature. The path out of unhealthy bonds is to form healthy bonds, to be connected to people you want to be present with. Addiction is just one symptom of the crisis of disconnection that's happening all around us. We all feel it. Since the 1950s, the average number of close friends an American has been steadily declining. At the same time, the amount of floor space in their homes has been steadily increasing. To choose floor space over friends, to choose stuff over connection. The war on drugs we've been fighting for almost a century now has made everything worse. Instead of helping people heal and getting their life together, we have cast them out from society. We have made it harder for them to get jobs and become stable. We take benefits and support away from them if we catch them with drugs. We throw them in prison cells, which are literally cages. We put people who are not well in a situation that makes them feel worse and hate them for not recovering. For too long, we've talked only about individual recovery from addiction. But we need now to talk about social recovery, because something has gone wrong with us as a group. We have to build a society that looks a lot more like Rat Park and a lot less like those isolated cages. We are going to have to change the unnatural way we live and rediscover each other. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. This video is a collaboration with Johan Hari, the author of the book Chasing the Scream, The First and Last Days of the War on Drugs. He was very kind to work with us on this video.
Thank you. What did you call it? An epidemic, not a drug epidemic, an epidemic of
Despair.
Despair. Yeah, that just sounds so powerful. And that's exactly what we work with in ourselves. You know, I did so much what my friends called social engineering in the early days, like 30 years of legal aid lawyering, mediation, divorce mediation, anti-racism work. And it was all good work, but I was not aware of my own mind. And I would go in and out of despair and anger and judging and hope and kindness and meanness and fix it. And it doesn't work. And I think that's what Peter's pointing at, you know. It's not a matter you don't have compassion. I think it's a matter of you're looking and saying, you want to know the causes and let's get at the root. And what Eric shared just, you know, and the root, the Buddha was so smart, my God. Just those Four Noble Truths, it's like, oh my gosh. It's like, oh yeah, suffering is, so I can't escape it. I keep trying to escape it, like just those other people can suffer, but I won't. You know, I'll have my little rat park that is so nice. And you, go, whatever, just stay away. Or come here if I want you, but I will decide. And where's the cause? It's not my brother-in-law. I thought for the longest time it was my brother-in-law. Way back in Vietnam War, my brother-in-law threw me out of the house for my anti-war activities. So from then on, the problems were my brother-in-law. Well, I did a lot of trying to fix him, and it didn't do anything. Or fix my sister, right? But no. I have to look here. Buddhists are insiders, they say. Insiders. We start inside. It doesn't mean we don't ever act outside, but the first place we look, what am I doing? How's my mind? You know? We can't come from anywhere good unless we do that. Good or effective. Did you want to say more?
Okay, that's good.
Anybody want to say more thoughts that are bubbling up? Questions? Yeah, Diane.
Well, I was a pediatrician, and soon after I retired, I was rear-ended at a red light. And you know, now having gone through about 12 broken bones and surgeries and multiple injuries and lots of pain meds and everything, I wound up in a pain clinic, you know. And I now know lots of people who are dependent. I won't say necessarily addicted, but dependent. And, you know, maybe addicted. I know a lot of them are craving more all the time. And what the whole thing has taught me is that we are just one moment away from this. Every single one of us.
Yeah.
I mean, I was lucky in that I did not become dependent or addicted to drugs. But, you know, to use the old phrase there, but for the grace of God, go on. I mean, you know, I suppose I was lucky because I was able to get the support that I needed and the help. But we are all so close to something like this happening to us. It's not our fault. That doesn't reflect a personal weakness in us. I mean, from the very first day, my pain management was horrible. And that's a failing of the medical system. That's not a failing of me. Okay? And so, that, if anything, gives me compassion.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about us as being, you know, if I were more Herculean and stronger and everything, it's not about that.
Yeah. Any moment.
Any one of us could find ourselves in this at any time through no fault of our own.
It's the nature of samsara to be uncertain. Uncertain. That's one of our sufferings as beings. We don't know we don't know the next moment what's happening. Honestly, think about it. You have your plan, like I'm going to sit here and listen for the next X minute, then I'm going to go here and I'm going to go there. You don't know that that's going to happen.
And
This is the uncertainty, and therefore we can have huge compassion for self and one another. Human life is uncertain, and even at the very best moments, it's just always slightly unsatisfactory. Because even in the bliss moments, we want it to last a little longer, and right there it's a bit ruined. So this is the suffering of this existence called samsara. What is samsara? My teacher used to go, this body, this life, taking this on through craving. That's suffering. Craving, grabbing things, pushing them away, wishing for this, hating that. That's samsara. It's not some other place. And we're all in it together, which is Diane pointing out. We're all in the uncertainty together. So dropping judgments about one another's sufferings. I realized at one point I was getting very angry at someone, and this thought came to me, I'm angry at the way she's suffering. I don't like that kind of suffering. She should suffer differently and make Zopa comfortable. And I was just totally cracking up. I was like, boy, is that ever nuts. You know, someone's suffering, and just like the video showed us, we add on, we pile on, put them in a cell and do this and do that, instead of what could help here. And we don't always know what can help. We do sometimes have this idiot compassion, and the thing I'm doing with that now is at least knowing it can exist in my mind and cherishing the fact that I feel compassion. Cherish that. Like, hey, I feel compassion here, and I haven't got a clue what would help. Sit with that. Sit with that till you get some clarity. And maybe what you can do is work on your own mind, and maybe what you can do is calm down and send out loving kindness, and maybe that's enough action.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Have a good week.
I'll see you next Sunday.
Good.
What if it's
Well,
funny?
I don't know, but I'm gonna be